Hello, I'm Typha, and I'm a college student majoring in game development. I had an idea a while ago to log every project that I made throughout the year, and this is that video. I'll be detailing a little bit of what went into each project while showing off clips, and talking a bit about what I learned or advice that I'd give others. Keep in mind while watching this that I'm still learning, and am by no means an expert. If I say any wrong information and find out later, I'll have a pinned comment talking about it. So with all that said, here's my 1-year game development showcase. So this was the first actual project we made in our game development class. It was a pretty simple prompt, which made sense for an intro course. Click a button and have a random number and make some text appear like it would in a Magic 8 Ball, with some graphics to make it prettier. I had a lot of extra time when I was finished, so I thought having you actually shake the ball would be fun, and added some extra math to have a bit more variety in the random number the harder you shook the ball. Did this work? I'm not sure, I was too lazy to do much real testing. But this taught me a valuable lesson that I keep in future projects. Put in that effort to make something more than just the requirements. It makes it more fun, and also means you'll learn more in the process. Not to mention having something more impressive in your portfolio. I'm not really sure if I could call this one a game. I think we were more learning how to use the UI system and make sure our assets were consistent in their dimensions and quality. We just made a random character generator, and for mine I used the minigame Picture Imperfect from Mario Party 3, which was basically the same concept. And it gave rise to some very fun faces for me to use, my favorite being an emote in my Discord server now, Smug Toad. Our first real game in the class, a version of the old game Lunar Lander. For this project I was really strapped in other classes, so I couldn't really do what I wanted to for the project, which taught me a very different valuable lesson. If you don't have the time to be extra, realize it early. I spent so much time trying to figure out the physics of a rocket ship with momentum that I just had a few hours to figure out everything else. Which is not where you want to be in game development. The controls and features are important, but it's not enough for a full game, just ask Yandere Simulator. I was still able to finish everything, but I may have had to pull the classic change the file after submitting at 3 AM trick. Sorry, Professor. This one was fun, Whack-A-Mole. I decided to make a needlessly existential and violent version of Whack-A-Mole. Whenever you would hit a mole, an obituary would take up the center of your screen, detailing the life of the mole you just senselessly murdered with a hammer. Over time, that obituary would get more and more transparent until you just didn't see it anymore. Was this a lot for a college project about Whack-A-Mole? Probably, but it was still fun to come up with 100 unique mole obituaries with my friends. A group project. My friend Casey and I worked together to do this one, recreating an old arcade game. We decided to do Frogger, using the original assets and making it from scratch. This also meant we would be using a cloud function to update each other's projects, which is super important in this field. The application we used was GitHub for this, because GameMaker doesn't have a built-in system as far as I know. We made 10 levels and did as much as we could to make it an arcade game with tile-based movement. I also wanted to be a little bit extra and made a remix of the Frogger theme, the chorus of which absolutely slaps in my opinion. All in all, really happy with how this one turned out. Another group project, this time an original idea. My team had my friends Sam, Joseph, and Donald on it. The idea was to try and have randomly generating rooms with various preset puzzles, enemy layouts, and rewards, with a boss and shop room guaranteed as well. Ultimately, we didn't have nearly enough time to make all that work, and had to settle with a test room and a prototype for the generating rooms. But that was all that was needed to get a good grade on it. We decided when we had a bit more experience we might come back to it, so who knows, maybe this game could actually be a thing someday. In this class we had worked on 2 sets of 2 projects. One was made by following the professor in class, and the other was by taking what we learned and putting our own spin on that genre of the project. It had to be similar, but didn't have to be exactly the same. This was most people's first time using the Unity engine, so it made sense. This project was making a game kind of like Galaga. I'm not going to go too much into this one because really I just followed instructions to make it. This was my attempt to port the TERGIVERSE game from the last semester to Unity, which I kinda had to stop halfway for 2 reasons. One being that I was now on my own and couldn't do nearly as much, the second being that there were specific requirements that the style of game we were making couldn't fulfill. One example being that our main method of attack was going to be swinging a sword, and the project required that a projectile be fired instead. So ultimately I just made this using the assets and decided to wait until everyone else had the time to work on the project too. This project was a bit less of a game and more an introduction for everyone to learn how to create a 3D environment. Learned a lot in this project because I'd never actually worked in a 3D game before, only 2D ones. So this project was one that I did for 2 classes. And it makes a lot more sense if I talk about it there, so just keep that in mind for a bit later. This class was a great one, but also one of the toughest I've ever taken. Tons of time spent outside of class to try and figure out the projects. The first half of the semester was about making our own fantasy world, something that an entire game series could take place in. The second half was about making a game in that world. This is what my team, Joseph, Sadie, Jasmine, and Keaton and I came up with. Our world idea was this: a collection of floating islands over an uninhabitable surface, all with their own environment and peoples, and how they interact with each other. There's so much lore here that I don't even know where to begin. The main story was that the world was created by the death of a god, and there was a cult trying to reawaken that god for the sake of purifying the world. Warring nations all over, two superpowers each trying to dominate each other in pursuit of their own ideals, and throughout it all, tales of people defying their nature to help their fellow beings. I was really happy with how this world turned out, and even more happy with how my game set in the world did, which was... This is that project I was talking about earlier, the one where I made a 3D game. It features these two blocks, which are supposed to be an avian named Aerith. I don't know how to make 3D models, can you tell? He's a courier and a protector of an ancient artifact, and the main drive of the game was going to be traveling across some of the islands in the world and helping people while trying to beat a leader of the earlier mentioned cult. Ultimately, I didn't have time to put much writing into this project for the class called Writing for Games, so I didn't get a very good grade on it, but I still like it and want to come back to it someday to finish it when I have more experience. So this class wasn't actually for video game design, but board game design. Most of the projects were about putting spins on already existing games or working with limited tools, until the end where we were able to make our own. I made a version of tic-tac-toe using portals. The board was changed to a 5x5 layout, and the idea was that you could shift a row or column by one space, with a mark on the edge wrapping around to the other side if it got pushed off. My goal was to change the original structure of the game from ending in stalemates if both players knew what they were doing. After filling in all the spaces, they can still be moved around, and I think that makes this game never end in a tie. A very simple change to the game that makes the mind games a bit more complicated. You throw an extra trick throw before your final throw, and you can change your move between the two. Pretty simple, but pretty fun too. I had a goal with this game too. Make a version of Solitaire that you couldn't lose. I did this by having 4 draw decks and the ability to trade a line of cards for a new card. The main reason I did this was that we weren't making a digital version, but a physical one, and I lost the game almost immediately and had to set up the entire thing again. So this version keeps the puzzle solving feeling without feeling like a waste of time if the luck of the draw disagrees with you. The prompt here was making a game with nothing but dice. And to be honest, I had no clue what to do here. I ended up making a game that had elements of poker, with every person having 3 die and there being 10 in the center, where you had to try and guess the total of everyone's die. If you're my professor watching this, you could probably tell, so sorry. This game was one that was fun to play with friends. I called it something, like the math term. Everyone gets 5 cards, and you can play cards up to the number amount in the card in the discard pile. If you can't play a number card, then you can use one of your face cards. A king makes the person in front of you draw 2, a queen makes the person behind you draw 2, and a jack makes you draw 3. If you can't play anything, your turn is skipped. Person with the least cards at the end wins, or if someone gets 0. This was a fun game to pass time, and the rounds were quick. So this time we were given a lot more freedom. The idea was to make a board game, and we could do anything. To put it simply, my friends Sam, Joseph, Chris, and I made a physical version of Mario Party. Our own version of coins and stars, items, minigames, and spaces. The big change was the board. There were 4 different tiles, each having different attributes and events. The big change was these green spaces, which could swap or flip the tiles. If the tile was flipped, it had a similar board with some changes. It went through a lot of redesigns, but at the end of it, the game was really fun, even if we realized that Mario Party definitely works better as a video game. Another one where we had freedom. This time we had to make our own tabletop RPG, similar to Dungeons & Dragons. Same group as last time, we decided our main difference would be the idea of ghosts. There was a lot of lore that went into it, but the main idea was that if a living thing, or even an object, died, it would leave a ghost. How this played out in combat was the difference between a physical element or a spectral element. Imagine it like the difference between an attack and a special attack in Pokemon. In addition to this, there were various buffs and deficits that the players could have. Some decided on character creation, some that could be acquired later. Based on the test run that we did, the battle system streamlined a lot of complications and made playing the game a breeze. I DM'd the game, and I think the story I came up with was pretty fun too. No goals, just a game. This was a tough one, but also one that I think had real potential to continue someday. My game was about connecting dots, simply put. Using different cards, you could set up a layout according to a puzzle card, then try to solve it using the remaining ones. I only had the time to make cards that could be solved on a 3x3 grid, but given how many possibilities just that had, I think that more card types and more puzzles could make this game a really fun puzzle game to break out. This is another one I might come back to someday. If there's one thing that I can definitely say is important when learning game development, it's that you should always try to be doing something more than what your class has asked for. That doesn't have to mean doing more for those projects, it could be working on your own outside of the class too. Here's some of the projects that I made outside of class. 3 smaller ones that were mostly trying to test out genres, and 1 big one. A quick puzzle game. This game I was trying to figure out mouse controls in Unity, along with some basic UI. This game makes a triangle and you have to make all the colors match. Since this was pretty often impossible with the cursor, I gave the player the option to turn it upside down, making the game both beatable and more strategic. A quick platformer. This game I was trying to learn a bit about having timed events happen around the player, namely these enemies. Since bouncing on them was the only way to get certain collectibles, I had to make them spawn, and more importantly respawn, only when the player could use them. I think this game is short, simple, and easy, but it has a lot of room to be made into something better. A quick top-down shooter. By this point I'd learned quite a bit more, so I wanted to make a game that had more polish than my previous ones. Cursor controls, rotations and line drawing, particle effects, animations, and UI. I combined all of this to make an endless arcade game. Well, I say endless, but it gets way too difficult to be that without any power-ups. Something fun that I like in this is God Mode, making this an explosion-filled color fest. Timeshift. This is going to be the first game that I actually publish. Not just for sentimentality's sake, but also because it's nearly at the point where I can actually do that. I've been working on the demo of this game for nearly a year now, picking up tricks and trying to make it as professional as I can. The only thing left that I have to add are really music and sound effects, which has been the case for the last few months actually. God, I need to finish this thing. If you have an idea you're passionate about, try to see it through. Even if you need to scrap it and start over because you've learned new things, it's worth it. This is why I'm in college for game development, because if this is what I can do on my own right now, I can't wait to see what comes next. Thanks for watching, everyone.